Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. Here we go. Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast, session 114 with Dr. Theo Versteegh, PhD. He is a physiotherapist with over 20 years of clinical experience in sports medicine and a published researcher in the field of neck pain, neck training, and concussion risk mitigation. He's the inventor of Topspin 360, the first patented multi-planar neck training device that strengthens the neck in a manner consistent with the science on how to prevent concussion and treat chronic neck pain. Doc, Theo, good to see you again. We've had lots of conversations. We've had lots of space in between our conversations, and why not get caught up here on the airwaves? Let's just say hi, and we'll jump right in.
Awesome. Yeah, James, sounds great. Agreed. We've had some good chats, and let's carry it on.
Here we go. Beautiful. So let's start with your research and what got you interested in sort of neck pain, chronic neck issues, rehab, concussion, how that developed towards the product that you've created, where that is, lots of things to talk about. But where did your interest start in concussion?
The interest started in concussion with back in 2011 when Sidney Crosby had his kind of big concussion that kept him up for almost a year. And we were kind of just sitting in the bar after playing rec hockey ourselves. And that's when you solve all the world's problems. And you know, with my physio background and watching that hit, it looked like his head wasn't even attached to his body, at least with the kind of the initial hit. And I said, you know, if his neck was stronger, he wouldn't have had such a violent concussion. And so that got me thinking about neck training. And back, like I played football back in university at Western, and back then we had the 4-way neck machine. So you sit down, you push your head forward, 10 times, push it back 10 times, to the right 10 times, to the left 10 times. And I was like, when you think about just I guess the easiest would be like the SAID principle, right? Specific adaptations to impose demands. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the 4-way neck, that'll improve your neck's ability to take heavy weight and push against it, but it won't necessarily teach it to stabilize a head in sports, right? And the analogy would be if you look at the ankle, and that, if you were to have someone who sprained their ankle and you're working on rehabbing their ankle, and then your only strengthening was like green TheraBand, eversion, inversion, plantar flexion, and dorsiflexion, and then, okay, you can do that 10 times each direction. You are good for the field. Like, that there's no chance they would be able to like hop back on the pitch and not sprain their ankle the next time they try to twist or turn.
Right.
So, when you look at that, and arguably that's also I think the big issue that, expanding that further into neck pain. Like, neck pain is the 4th leading cause of disability in the world. And for some reason, we treat the spine completely differently to how we treat the rest of the body. Like an ankle sprain, we are really good at treating ankle sprains. Like it's very rare that someone's going to have a chronic ankle. And even if they do, we can usually rehabilitate them with dynamic exercise, loading those tissues to get them back into healthy tissues. But we don't do the same with the neck. Basically, the neck, the initial treatment's the same. You kind of, protected almost, movement, and you work on getting them full pain-free range of motion, and then we discharge them.
Exactly. Where do you think that hang up is in your experience? Do you think it's sort of the dynamic nature of the neck, all of these things that could potentially, we're sort of threatened with spinal injuries going through school and how dangerous and catastrophic they can be? Does that apply? Is it an overly complex area, or is it a series of joints that we should be able to manually work with and sort of strengthen in a procedural manner to get them better and moving and functioning in order to help recover?
I think, yeah, I think you're right on in that. I think for the most part, healthcare practitioners are really intimidated by the neck because, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it is a complex structure, right? I mean, you've got these 7 vertebrae that move independently and like create all these, you've got the zygapophyseal joints and the intervertebral disc. Like, it's a fairly complex structure because it does move your head in every direction and every combination thereof, right? Like, it's not like, you've got the elbow joints, 2 planes, the ankle joints, is like essentially 4 movements, and like even the shoulder and the hip, it's a ball and socket. It's a pretty simple joint.
Mhm.
Whereas with the neck, you do have these articulations that move, and they've got to glide and move perfectly. I think on that level, it's just being intimidating because it also houses the spinal cord, right? So it's just like, ooh, like you don't want to,
Yeah,
cause anything with that, right? So I
yeah.
think that's probably a big source of it, is just the intimidation. But at the end of the day, the muscular tissues, everything in the neck area, it's the same musculoskeletal tissues that are in the entire rest of the body. And we know how those tissues respond after injury. And if you don't dynamically load those tissues to normalize them, they do not heal on their own, right? Like, you can't put an ankle sprain in an air cast boot for 6 weeks, take the air cast boot off, and think that it's fully healed, ready to go.
Hmm. And yet, again, to draw the parallel in concussion rehab or neck rehab or whiplash or any of these things that are sort of being lumped in this sort of similar container, it tends to be very symptom driven. As soon as patient A says, nope, no more symptoms when I'm doing this, you do a little bit of exertion, we raise the heart rate a little bit, put them back through, and then it's okay. Away you go. And I mean, again, that's a very simplified version. I think we have
Yep.
gotten a little bit better in terms of, all right, you've had this much time off, so you need to have a gradual return to
Yep.
play.
A
But there's
little bit better.
right, a little bit better, but still certainly not great. And I think, again, like, you highlight some really good points right out of the gate, and that's like these tried and true principles of, the SAID principle is one that's never going to go away. It's one of the only principles that's been proven, tried and true through the
Time and time again.
last, yeah, every time it's been applied, right? And that
Yep.
dynamic load to normalize a joint or series of joints prior to return to taking, the potential load that you would take in sports. So,
Yep.
okay, so we understand maybe there's some complexities there. We understand that rehab definitely needs to be a component part. Your interest over a beer or after a rec hockey game and seeing a neck whip around and saying, "Oh, imagine his neck was able to sustain." That led to some further thinking, some further ideas, some further development in your brain. Walk us through sort of the gradual progression from watching that one in the bar to Topspin 360. How did they sort of, and what is that product for those that are unfamiliar with it?
Yeah. So a big part of the thought process was like back in that January when he had the injury, it was like, okay, so I knew kind of a couple components that I wanted to build in. One was like true multiplanar, including rotation. Like there because it looked like his head just rotated around. So like, okay, how do you strengthen rotation on such a spherical head, right? And it's very difficult. And like I was, like, hey, do you do like a mouth guard and you kind of bite it and you kind of do that? Like, no, and you can run into possibly TMJ stuff. And the other factor was I had, back when I did my physio undergrad, it was like a BSc PT, and we had a 4th year study. And for my 4th year study, we did the physiological effects of concentric versus eccentric contractions, right? And so with that, I knew that eccentric contractions are a very different beast than concentric contractions. And when you only train, again, going back to the 4-way neck, you're taking a heavy weight, you're pushing it concentrically, and then you're lowering it back down eccentrically.
Right.
But the muscles eccentrically have about a 30% capacity above and beyond what you can do lift concentrically. So unless you specifically focus on the eccentric capacity, you'll only ever improve the concentric up kind of close to where the eccentric goes up, a little bit, but you really just kind of bring the concentric in line with where the eccentric is. And if you think about a concussion, you need to train the muscles to absorb a load, not generate. So you need to train them eccentrically to kick in. And you need to focus on the fastest twitch muscle fibers, because a concussion is a really fast event. So traditional neck strengthening, again, the SAID principle, taking that heavy weight, pushing against it, you're going to get a big neck, because you're converting your type 2B or your type 2X fibers into much slower type 2A fibers. They're bulkier, but they're a lot slower to respond.
Yeah. And again, I love this, because you keep tying it back to that, one of the principles that we tend to forget about that's so simple is like specific adaptations to the imposed demand. It needs to match what you're trying to achieve. Exactly. And again, I just love that this keeps, you keep highlighting this, because for me, I see this in the training world, with amateur sports, with pro sports, in certain spaces and facilities. We get so far down the road of being creative or trying to do something, that it looks a certain way, that we miss the real basic foundational principle of rehab and training in general.
KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid.
This is it. Absolutely. Yeah. So okay. So continue down the path.
So I was kind of thinking about these different ways, and I had, like a few different kind of contraptions. And then I guess serendipitously, one of the contraptions I had built had a swivel on it and like a weight, and then it kind of happened to be swinging on me. I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I like strapped it on, and I went and I was like, yes, this is, and like it like ticked every box. Like it was like that, the penny dropped. I'm like, this is exactly what I was looking for. And at the time I was like, great, all I gotta do is go in, and because I just finished doing my master's, my research-based master's, and I was like, just go to the literature, find the supporting literature, and go to market, right? And like back in I guess 2011, 2012, there was nothing in the literature connecting the neck to concussion. Right. Like it was so sparse, right? And so I was like, well, knowing the work that would be required just to test if this, theory or idea even has legs, that's a lot of work. So I might as well turn that into a PhD. That way, if I'm wrong with one of my assumptions along the way, well, plan B is I've got my PhD and I can go into academia.
There you go. Yep. Beautiful. Learn from mistakes. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so then I embarked on doing my PhD to test, and then now, fortunately, over the past decade, like continually more and more research is coming out in support of neck strengthening. But at the same time, there's also almost a different group that seems to be refuting it almost, and like how they're refuting it is, I guess with all due respect, really uneducated. Like it's just like, again, you really got to have some depth of knowledge, again, even of the SAID principle, as to why this approach would not work, and why this research would have shown that. Like there's for instance, there is one study that looked at using helmet accelerometers, and showed that those with a stronger neck had more acceleration during a game, like whether it's football or hockey, but they only measured the helmet. And from my own PhD research, I can tell you that those with a stronger neck, their head accelerated less, but their helmet accelerated more, because when you apply a load, the helmet slides off the head because the head's quite rigid. Right. Whereas those who are a bit weaker, it kind of pulls the whole body with it. So it would seem that they have less head acceleration, but it's the helmet that's accelerating, not the head.
Right. So then the
Again,
technology,
this is into the weeds a bit, but
yeah. And the technology sort of continues to advance and tries to match, and we can't put something inside the skull to measure the acceleration of the brain, or inside the neck potentially to measure that, true measurement. But
I will say I'm quite optimistic about the mouth guard accelerometers.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's with regards to measuring head acceleration, I think that's certainly kind of the best approach.
It's fixed. It's somewhat internal. This makes sense.
I mean, attached to the mandible, which is attached to the skull. Like, yeah, you're not moving one without the other.
Yeah, no, beautiful. And I think, and I think it's interesting, you look at different sports, and I've worked with multiple different types of helmets, hockey and football and,
Yeah.
lacrosse and all these different things. And half the time it looks like the athletes' heads are spinning all the way around when they get hit, but
Yeah, there's
really
a helmet that's
it's the
like, and then they
helmet.
gotta,
And then they just fix it,
yeah,
and it looks way worse sometimes than what's actually gone on, because the helmet isn't situated, fully attached. So, okay, so you start to look at these things, these principles of sort of injury and load and acceleration in the neck and all these things, and what comes next from there through the PhD and your research, you come up with.
yeah, with the topspin 360, and yeah, and then essentially start. So I did my PhD. Like it ended up covering a couple of other areas, because one thing that is missing in the literature is like a gold standard for measuring even static neck strength. Like that's kind of one thing that's quite void in it, that there isn't a gold standard. So I needed to develop a very practical, kind of easy, portable way to measure multi-planar neck strength. Because again, the neck moves not just flexion, extension, right, left side flexion, but rotation as well in every plane they're in, right? And right now, most, I guess, healthcare practitioners, if they measure neck strength, they'll do deep neck flexor endurance. Well, deep neck flexor endurance is exactly that. It's the endurance of the deep neck flexors. It has very little to do with strength. In fact, like when I look at the relationship between deep neck flexor endurance and static neck strength, there's a very weak correlation between the two.
Sure, and that would be a test, sort of, okay, lay down on your back, and let's see how long you can hold your head up off the table.
Chin, yep, bring it forward, hold there. How long can you hold it? Hold. Oh, you're done. Yeah.
Right. And again, not a specific demand relevant to sport.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And just sort of tying back to sort of 2011, which seems, I guess, a long time ago in certain aspects, but not so long ago as well, 10 years, 11 years ago. And it seems like this aha breakthrough definitely since then, that like, the neck does have something to do with concussion, right? Like the
Yeah.
whiplash component, generally speaking, there is some component of whiplash. It's not,
Yeah.
not just a tried and true blow directly to the head, where the neck is completely rigid and the head and the brain is this egg
Exactly.
yolk in an eggshell, right?
Well, and that's another thing that I like, almost like a pet peeve of mine, is that when people think concussion, they think the classic coup counter coup, like the brain smacks on the skull and then it bounces back and hits the back end of the skull,
Still out there. Yep. Yep.
right? And it's like, no, like, admittedly, yes, there are certain concussions that happen that way, but they're very few. The vast majority of them are actually the shear strain and the torsional forces that get transmitted right at the neck. Because it's like, the other thing that that I like to, I guess, think about is that every other part of the body, where do injuries happen? Injuries always happen at the point of movement. So you've got a shoulder problem, not a humerus problem. You've got an elbow problem, not a forearm problem, right? Like, basically, it's because these are very stable. It's the joints that have mobility where you run into trouble. It's the same thing with my, I probably have one. Like, basically, my power cord, right? It always breaks down right at the essentially where the wire connects to the stable connector. It doesn't break down on the connector. It's always at the connection,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And that's the same thing with the brain. Like, the skull is an incredibly stable structure, and the brain is really well situated in there. But where it's not is right at the neck, where you've got a ton of movement at these upper three vertebrae.
Mhm.
Specifically, the upper two have like 50% of your cervical rotation in those two vertebrae alone, right?
Yeah, and then to layer that, the joints that move also have other structures embedded around and within or under, or in the surrounding tissue, right? The ocular musculature is in the neck and comes through. You have all
Totally.
of the receptors that come from the musculoskeletal system, in terms of different
Exactly.
mechanoreceptors and different. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
So
in
then
the
we
in the
start talking.
cervical ocular reflex, right? So I
Yeah,
mean, like, so many times when you're treating concussions, like, oh, it's a visual concussion. Yeah, But where does that visual concussion get processed? It gets processed at the brainstem, and it doesn't, like, you don't have someone who has their head perfectly still and they have blurry vision. It's when they're moving their head, they're like, it's just everything seems to be, I can't kind of, because their brain is trying to do what should be happening at the reflex level at the brainstem, but the proprioception is thrown off at the neck, and it throws off these inherent reflexes that all of a sudden everything's kind of shaking around. And that's why, when you do the VOR and you're kind of doing the movement, well, what is often forgotten is that the vestibular ocular reflex, you're also stimulating the cervical ocular reflex. So you can't automatically say, oh, it's the VOR that's a problem. That's
Right.
not the only structure that you're testing there. And a lot of people think that as soon as it's kind of positive, oh, that's the VOR. Not necessarily.
Right. No, beautiful. And I think these are amazing points for all of us in the space and all of us in the sport. I've always, I think, navigated concussion a little bit differently than most. I mean, I've tried not to be down one path too far in terms of my beliefs or what's true. Not, there's so much out there, right? And everybody's sort of looking for this golden ticket, this one thing that's going, and that's never the case. That's never the case with an ankle. That's never the case with a knee.
Yeah.
Everyone is different. Every rehab is different. Every person responds to different stimuli differently. But yeah, I'm not sure that there's a golden egg, but I do think that what we need to do is sort of simplify the outlook of the mechanism of injury and look at what was the mechanism of injury, what joints and tissues are involved, and can we start there and then work, systemically. I don't have to be a neurologist to
Optometrist,
understand.
right?
Yeah, or an optometrist or all of these things. If I can understand, okay, there is a VOR, okay, there is a cervical component to this, there is, all these different things, I can pass along, to those specialists once we get there. But like, we could check the joints following an injury and make sure they're stable, make sure that, okay, when they rotate, maybe I don't understand that there's 50% of that rotation in C1 and C2, but I know that they're okay going to flexion. I know they're okay when their eyes are closed. You can start to at least eliminate some factors when you're evaluating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the one thing that, because I was when I was at the sports clinic at Western, I was like one of two kind of sport concussion specialists where they'd send me the complicated concussions, and like, even for me, yeah, absolutely. There's a number of, like, the visual ones initially where I'm like, oh yeah, like, let's get other kind of, I guess, team members involved with this, but interestingly, then they bring out, like, oh yeah, we need to give them like prism glasses and all this. But I never saw a way out of those. Like, that's always just a crutch, right? So what's the fundamental system that we should be able to train or retrain to normalize again? Giving them glasses that change their perspective isn't a long-term solution. You've got to give them something that can get them back to where they were, if that's possible. And what I would say is that, like, now, from my personal experience treating with Topspin 360, this ticks a huge box and a huge area that has not been addressed previously, and it wasn't even possible to address it previously, because, as I mentioned, like, the only way to strengthen the neck before, you really had three methods. You had the deep neck flexion endurance, which, as we covered, that's using the SAID principle. That's next to useless, and that's a single plane of movement. So that's one of 6 directions that you can go. Like, maybe you throw in the extensor, so that's 2 of 6.
Right.
And then you've got, okay, TheraBand. So you grab a TheraBand, you can do side flexion, right, left, and then, flexion and extension. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 of 360 degrees that the head actually can move. And so if you were to try to do kind of every movement with a TheraBand, you'd be spending hours trying to train your neck. Right. And there's research done in 2013 where they took one group and they just strengthened them, gave them TheraBand strengthening, like 4 ways. And then the other group, they did TheraBand strengthening and proprioceptive exercises. The group that just did TheraBand, they didn't even have statistically significant improvements in static neck strength, but what they did have is statistically significant detriment to their proprioception. And it wasn't small. It was a 35% decrease in their joint position error, or I guess increase in the joint position error. So, like, with the whole laser on the head, kind of, okay, am I, back to where I was? And after training for, I think it was like 6 or 8 weeks on TheraBand, their ability to reposition their head was worse by 35%.
Hmm.
The group that did the strengthening and the therapy and the proprioceptive exercises didn't get any worse with their proprioception, but at the same time, they also didn't get any better.
Right.
Right. So, when you're looking at rehabilitating after the neck and like, oh, all right, yeah, I listen to this podcast, I need to get in some neck strengthening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you do that, but if you've got someone who's got terrible proprioception, you're just borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. And like, yeah, you've got a bit more strength, but now they're way worse in figuring out where their balance is and where they are in space, and yeah, banging ahead and everything that they can, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I sort of equate this for myself in the space as sort of the, it's the gap between getting a patient or an athlete off the table and back on the field, and then from back
Yeah.
on the field to back into competition, because there's a huge gap there. Just
Yep.
because they get cleared by the surgeon, they're 9 months out of ACL, looks good, tissue looks good. They met the biodex, they did all these different things. Psychologically, maybe they're there or not. All these other components of sort of how have you progressed from, linear running to curved running to
Yep.
change of direction, agility, to controlled environment, to semi-controlled, to unpredictable, right? Or uncontrolled. And these are the areas where I don't know, where a tool like this really plays that ground and does the work for you. So, and I'm not trying to sell the product. What I am trying to do is have you talk about it. You're the expert in it. You've identified a massive gap in sort of a lot of different areas when it comes to rehab in the neck and concussion.
Yeah.
So how would you describe a training session or a treatment session utilizing the product?
So it's, I mean, that's the other thing that's really, let's say, remarkable with this thing is how bloody time efficient it is. So you kind of boot it up, and I'll show you.
For the listeners out there, Theo is putting this on. He's got it. It's a football helmet. He's strapped it on. Chin straps are in, and he's loaded it up. Okay, boot it up. Give it to our listeners as well.
There. And then essentially, so I've booted up. It's kind of start up the app. The app just measures the once I get the arm spinning, and then I'll show you. So, boom. There. So that's my first, I guess, set of 30 revolutions or half set. And then I go the other direction, which.
So for our listeners out there, he's essentially oscillating his neck to create the spinning. On top of the helmet is a weighted, how would you describe it?
Yeah, basically there's a kind of a turret with almost looks kind of like a tank with a weight at the end of it.
Yeah.
And then the turret is has a couple of bearings in it so it can spin freely about the axis.
Right.
And then kind of like a hula hoop for the head, the faster I kind of get that weight kind of spinning around almost like a lasso or a hula hoop.
Yeah.
Then and the really interesting thing is the way it works. Again, we're talking about specificity of specific adaptations. Basically, the way it works is with centripetal force, which, for your listeners who remember physics, it's mass times velocity squared over r. And the key metric to remember with that is that it's velocity squared. What that means is the faster the weight gets spinning, the force that is being generated goes up exponentially to the factor of 2. Now, for therapists in that, we aren't just interested in the amount of force that we're generating, similar to that like static neck strength. We don't really care how much force you can generate if it takes you 12 minutes to generate that force. What we're interested in is the rate of force development. How quickly can your neck generate stabilizing force? So that is RFD is force over time. As the force goes up, as the velocity of that weight goes up, the time per revolution goes down. So what that creates is another exponential component, such that someone who's spinning it at about 150 RPM is generating just over 3 pounds of force. And someone who's spinning at 300 RPM, so double that initial speed, is generating over 33 pounds of force. So it scales, and it's truly multi-planar in that you've got to constantly be responding in every angle as it's spinning. And if you lose coordination or fatigue out, the weight stops spinning instantly because of the nature of centripetal force. You need to be fighting it every moment that it is spinning. As soon as you stop fighting it, it gets converted into centripetal momentum, and the force drops by over 90%.
Huh. It's not like this isn't well thought out or well designed. Now, the next question for me in talking with other practitioners in sports that don't wear a football helmet is like, well, nobody's going to wear that. It looks silly. And you and I have had this conversation is like, we do a lot of things that look silly just because other people have been doing them that don't make any sense when it comes to training to get back on the field or training to get stronger for sport, which may or might not have a direct correlation. Here we have specific demands. You're imposing them and you're responding to them in the prevention or mitigation of concussion risk. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've run into a little bit of resistance with that with practitioners. How would you address that? And then, like, let's talk through the realities of this thing.
You're exactly right. And I would say the resistance we run into is with teams and organizations and therapists who don't think they have a concussion problem on their team. Mm-hmm. And and the funny thing is, concussions isn't that big a deal for us. Oh, really? How many did you have? They never have zero. Like it says, like for football, I remember I was having a conversation with this one NCAA team that will remain nameless, and they're like, well, we actually didn't really struggle with concussions last year. Really? How many did you have last year? I think we only had 23. Like, what?
No problem.
Isn't that like a quarter of your team?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God. And so it's interesting that those people is like, okay, thanks for your time. When you figure out you've got a problem with concussion, you give me a call. Mm-hmm. Because it's no use trying to convince them that they've got a problem with concussion. It works well with teams and coaches who are like, holy shit, I lost my best player, and like all these players I got to figure this out. Like this is I think I told you about the Citadel women's volleyball team, right? And because this kind of covers the wearing a football helmet. So the only reason why the Citadel has a women's volleyball team is because back in the 90s, this 154-year institution, all male institution, had to let women into their program. So as soon as they let women into the program, they're exposed to Title IX, meaning that they have to have equal representation with sports. And so women's volleyball was a really cheap and easy sport to bring on, so they keep their men's football team. It was for 20 years straight, they were hands down the worst team in the Southern Conference. Their average record was 1-17. And in 2018, they had a new head coach who came in, and the first thing you noticed was that they had 8 concussions on that team in 2018. Yeah. So of a team of about 16 players, that's losing like half your team at some point, right? Right. So we connected with him, and he's like, all right, well, I don't really care how this thing looks. Will this help my team with concussion, right? And I'm like, yeah, it'll help any high-risk team with concussion. It's like, all right, well, we'll start trying. So they started training on 2018 to 2019. 2019, they dropped down to 0 concussions. 2020, they had 0 concussions. In 2021, they had 0 concussions, and they won the Southern Conference Championship. So for athletic therapists and trainers and physios, like, and even strength and conditioning, like, oh, injury prevention, that's where it's at. Yes, it is. That is the low-hanging fruit, because interestingly, not only were we able to prevent all of their concussions, but we also prevented their knock-on lower extremity injuries. So they, over those 3 years, they didn't lose a single to an ankle sprain or an ACL, MCL, knee injury at all. So it's amazing how much better your entire team can get when they are able to play together every single week for 3 years in a row. Right. Where other teams that are much better to start off with have to, remove this setter for a few weeks because she gets a concussion. They remove this blocker for a couple of weeks because they have a concussion or like an ankle sprain or whatever. Like over 3 years, it's cumulative and it makes a huge impact.
Absolutely. And this is like, it highlights the point, right? It highlights the point on so many levels that yeah, I mean, low-hanging fruit is low-hanging fruit. Simplistic, like keeping things simple and looking at things in a less complex lens can allow you to see some pretty simple solutions. Not that this product or your studies and your research and your literature, scouring is simple, but you can draw some linear connections here to make some really seemingly obvious points to generate mitigation, injury deterrence, and make the point for doing things that make sense no matter how silly they look. Because
Yeah.
you and I talked at a conference, I think, and we talked about, like, why do we do what we do in the gym? Like, we have teams powerlifting because it says the word power, but powerlifting is a sport unto itself. And so
Exactly.
we're training, equestrian riders by doing powerlifting. It doesn't, there's no linear equation just because it says power. So
And
here
there's
you
no
are.
correlation with what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so this product is an amazing thing. And again, this isn't to push it out there, but I think it certainly is to push it out there for at least, people to challenge and people to look at. And so if people want to reach out to you, what's the easiest way to get in touch with you to discuss? I know you have a website, or what's best for you?
Yeah, so probably I mean, if they're curious about Topspin 360, they can go to topspin360.com. And then if they're interested, they can certainly email me, Theo at topspin360.com. So THEO at TOPSPIN360.com. I'm happy to chat. And I mean, the one thing I would say is that when you look at it, it does look absolutely absurd. And the other issue that we run into is that it is not intuitive how it works at all. Like it's kind of one of these things where you can't look at it like, oh, it's just like this. Oh, it's just like that.
Yeah.
It's like nothing you've seen before.
It's not like that Instagram video that you can just watch and all of a sudden you're an expert at it too,
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
So you got to put in the work. You gotta understand it, I think, and probably take some tech time to understand, the centrifugal forces and centrifugal momentum and all the things that you've touched on very briefly tonight that could go into, a weekend conference on sort of what matters and what doesn't when it comes to generating and sustaining force load through the neck in response to, whiplash, concussion, mild traumatic brain injury, whatever is getting lumped into this group. I would venture to say, training the neck to be responsive in these manners would have some play, obviously, like in the proprioceptive realm of balance and, understanding when you have to turn and make decisions and your head's moving quick. You're training a system as well as training musculature, right? Or
and that's also kind of, I think, what gets lost in the weeds when because you look at the literature and it's pretty strong that after concussion you're about 3 times as likely to have a lower extremity injury. And when you think about what goes into a lower extremity injury, so much is our 3 systems of balance. So you've got the visual system, the inner ear, and the proprioceptive system. And like the neck has the most proprioceptive fibers in the entire body. And this isn't a waste of resources. It's because if the neck is off just half a degree, that gets multiplied by a massive amount by the time it gets down to our foot and ankle. So you need to have this system working absolutely perfectly so that your visual and inner ear is telling you where the horizon is, and your body knows exactly where it is because it's transmitted through that to get down there.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, man. And again, like, sort of this podcast started out as sort of just a passion project to get people in touch with other people and to hear people's stories. And I love reiterating this because for me, it's like this started with an interest for you that grew into like, an idea. The idea translated into like research and a PhD, and then, essentially a game-changing product, if not a game-changing way of thinking and looking at the rehabilitative, process and training protocols and principles. And I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss it, at length tonight. You also came back from the 6th International Consensus Conference on Concussion in Amsterdam at the end of October. And any takeaways from that? Obviously, the consensus statement is going to be, I think, published in April is the target for the actual statement to come out. Any takeaways from the conference? I don't want to keep you too long. I know you got kids and things that are sleeping and things going on, but any takeaways from the conference? And again, like, really appreciate you coming on, man. It's
been a lot of fun. I'd say like probably for me, the biggest takeaway, we discussed this previous, that don't expect any grand leaps with that document. Like this is a baby step document, and they are not going to go out on any limbs. It's all going to be statements that they can make that are well supported by, randomized controlled trials, and not just one, but a bunch of them. So it's like on that, I don't anticipate, as an example, that Topspin 360 is going to be recommended in the concussion consensus statement anytime soon, for that matter, right? Like we're
Right.
talking
Yeah.
massive studies that they're using to make these statements.
Yep. No, beautiful. And I think, chip away slowly. We look back 10 years in the neck. Basically, concussion happened from the jawline upwards. It didn't have anything to do with the cervical spine. And here we are now talking about, obvious input and obvious issues that are connected. And so with the consensus statement, just keep chipping away with things that we can hang our hat on, and all these different research pieces that are coming in. Where is the Topspin 360 currently being used? You mentioned the Citadel. Just in terms of, sometimes it is a little bit of, well, if they're not using it, it must not be very good. So like, where is it being used? Because I think that's
So
also
actually,
reason
so we've got like we're just starting to kind of make a headway in the NCAA, but on the volleyball front, it's been really exciting because the Citadel women's volleyball team was the first team to use us, and they won, like, just absolute underdogs, unbelievable underdogs, won their conference title. Then Princeton men's team kind of heard about us. They had 5 concussions in 2021, so they started using us this past off season. They started their season 1-8, then they got up to 5-13. Then they went on a 10-game win streak, and they knocked off the fifth seeded team in the nation, the number 3 seeded team in the nation, the number 1 seeded team in the nation, to win their conference title.
Wow.
And then this past off season, we had Utah State University women's team, because they had, again, one of their key players had 3 concussions last year. So the head coach was like, oh, I've got to start protecting her. So they started training on it. They loved it. They trained the entire team in the off season. And again, Utah State were generally, middle of the road kind of team. And just a week and a half ago, they knocked off the number 1 seed in the Mountain West and the number 2 seed in the Mountain West to win the Mountain West Conference Championships.
Unbelievable. I don't know if
And
you're
when I tell you that, like,
works.
this is UNLV going into this tournament, were ranked number 1. They were 17-1 in their conference. So they had beaten Utah State repeatedly, and Utah State swept them in 3 games straight.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And again, and so both Princeton and Utah State, after the players that trained on the topspin, 0 concussions, 0 lower extremity injuries too.
Yep, it makes a difference, right? That continuity and playing together, and this is a contributing factor. There's no doubt about it. And it's interesting for me that volleyball has been the one to take to it. Does it surprise? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's because we were fortunate to get a team like the Citadel, where they're fairly kind of firm with their training, and it's just like, yeah, this is just part of your training. Okay, this is part of our training. So compliant, I guess, adherence was fantastic. And plus, I mean, it literally takes 2 minutes of training twice a week. So, like, you've got to have a pretty good excuse not to find 2 minutes twice a week to train on it, right? And again, like, this was a team that was just unbelievable underdog. Like, I mean, Disney should be making movies about this. It was kind of that big. And yeah, like, it's so we've been fortunate that those 3 teams have kind of jumped on board and fully went in. I mean, everyone would suspect, obviously, football, and that would have been mine. But it's also one of those things, as I kind of learn more about how football teams are organized and run, it's really hard to roll out anything across the team, especially something that's novel and unique, because whether you're an AT or a strength and conditioning coach, your job is almost always on the line. And just as much as if the head coach is fired or moved somewhere else, it's very likely, as a head AT or head strength and conditioning coach, you're fired or moving elsewhere as well.
And I mean, it's interesting. It's almost like you need a team in one space to say this thing works, and then everybody else will follow suit. And I'm glad it's starting to take off in at least one sport. I hope those therapists out there that are willing to challenge this and say there's something better on the market or something different on the market can provide as much detail and insight as you do. It's interesting. You don't have to look too far. I think this guy I just read a story today with Columbus, in the NHL, where he he's out again. It's his 7th diagnosed concussion. This is a veteran in the NHL, and I just wonder how many people that are in this space are looking to do something different, to actually make the change. Because again, that's the other part, right? It's hard. It's hard to be the group that's going to do the thing that nobody's doing. Until everybody.
You're exactly right. Because and that's when I'm dealing with pro teams and even the college teams. That's the first question. So who else is using it?
Right.
And meanwhile, it's like, what's the matter? Like, you claim to be cutting edge and willing to, be innovative. No, you're not. Like, none of them are, because that's not how they got their job. They got their job by towing the company line.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting dynamic that goes sort of well beyond probably the confines of this conversation, but more for conferences in the future for sure, man. Dr. Theo Versteegh is with us. Session 114 of Let's Chat, now the official podcast of WFAT, and hopefully sharing what you're doing and what those of you out there listening are doing as well, because this is about community. This is about showing that things can start with an interest, grow from an idea, and turn into far beyond just a passion project, and really connect to meaningful contributions to the space. So again, wanted to thank you for your time and for all the efforts you put into this and all the conversations we've had in the past, and for sticking with me to coordinate and get this thing done on a calendar here. I'll leave you with the last parting words, but to the audience, thank you again, and stay connected, lean in. Thanks for being part of the community. Theo, over to you to whatever you want to do to close it out.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thanks for having me on, and it's been a pleasure. And I really do hope that, and I'm fairly confident that your audience will kind of like just take an open mind, even take a pessimistic view on it. That's fine too. But really think about it, what you're trying to achieve and how to achieve it.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you again. Good night, everybody. We'll talk soon.
Thanks. Mm-hmm.
Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com. CONSULT@firststartherapy.com, on Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.